Some stories from U.S. military history sound too wild to be true, yet they happened. From cursed warships to lone heroes who defied death, these moments stretch the limits of belief. Today, we're diving into 5 of the most unbelievable stories ever to come out of the American military. Ghost soldiers, the incredible raid at Cabanatuan. It was 1945 in the sweltering jungles of the Philippines, and over 500 American POWs were wasting away behind enemy lines. Survivors of the infamous Bataan Death March, they were starved, beaten, and forgotten, until word of their camp reached U.S. intelligence. What followed was one of the most daring and improbable rescue missions in military history. The mission, a nighttime raid by 121 U.S. Army Rangers, supported by Filipino guerrillas and Alamo scouts, to break into the Cabanatuan prison camp, extract the prisoners, and vanish, all while surrounded by thousands of Japanese troops. Failure meant slaughter, but success, it would mean rewriting the rules of what was possible behind enemy lines. To get in undetected, the Rangers crawled on their stomachs for over a mile across open ground, under moonlight so bright the mission was nearly called off. A distraction was needed, and that's when one ranger mimicked the sound of a cow to divert attention. Amazingly, it worked. At 7:30 p.m., the attack began. Machine gunners were taken out silently. Guards never saw it coming. In less than 30 minutes, the Rangers stormed the camp, neutralized enemy forces, and rounded up the stunned prisoners, many too weak to walk. Filipino guerrillas arrived with carabao carts to carry them through the jungle, but the escape route wasn't clear yet. Japanese reinforcements were closing in fast. That's when the guerrillas, outnumbered and outgunned, did something few would expect. They held the line. Fierce firefights erupted in the jungle as the Rangers and POWs pushed through the darkness, navigating swamps, sniper fire, and exhaustion. When dawn broke, all 500-plus prisoners had been rescued. Only 2 Rangers were lost. The mission was so improbable, so cleanly executed, that many at the time couldn't believe it had actually happened. But it did, and it changed how special operations would be planned forever. And speaking of impossible odds, imagine flying solo over enemy territory, guarding a bombing squadron, and then realizing you're completely alone against 30 enemy fighters. Let's talk about that. One pilot against all odds, the James Howard story. Over Germany in January 1944, dozens of B-17 bombers were making their way toward a critical target. Their mission was simple: cripple the German war machine. But the skies above Nazi territory were never safe. What the bomber crews didn't know was that help would come from just one man, and it would change everything. Enter James Howard, a former Navy pilot turned Army Air Forces ace, flying his P-51 Mustang as part of a bomber escort group. The plan was standard: keep enemy fighters off the bombers, stay in formation, return home. But somewhere over Oschersleben, that plan collapsed. Howard became separated from his squadron, and then the German fighters arrived. 30 Luftwaffe aircraft swarmed the skies, diving straight for the unprotected B-17s. With no backup and no time to think, Howard made the kind of choice that separates heroes from legends. He attacked alone. He dove into the formation, blasting one fighter, then circling back again. Again. The bomber crews watched in awe as this lone American fighter kept engaging, outnumbered 30-1. When he ran out of ammo, he didn't retreat. He faked attacks to scatter enemy pilots. The Germans, confused and shaken, began to break formation. The battle lasted over 30 minutes. Not a single bomber was lost under Howard's protection. After the mission, bomber crews couldn't stop talking about the pilot who saved them. When asked who he was, one replied, "That was one hell of a pilot." They didn't even know his name yet. James Howard would go on to receive the Medal of Honor, becoming the only fighter pilot in the European theater to earn it. But perhaps even more powerful than his medal was the silence that followed. Because when word of what he did got out, even the enemy took notice. But if you think that's wild, wait until you hear about the ship so cursed it nearly blew up the President of the United States on accident. The USS William D. Porter, America's unluckiest warship. If ships could be cursed, the USS William D. Porter would have been the poster child. From the day it left port, this destroyer seemed magnetically drawn to chaos, but no one expected it to nearly trigger a global catastrophe within days of setting sail. In 1943, the Willie D, as the crew called it, joined a top-secret mission escorting the battleship USS Iowa, which just so happened to be carrying President Franklin D. Roosevelt. This was high-stakes stuff. Every ship in the convoy was ordered to maintain total radio silence. That's when the Porter accidentally launched a live torpedo straight at the Iowa. Panic erupted on board. Crew members screamed. Officers scrambled. The captain broke radio silence, desperately trying to warn the Iowa. "Torpedo in the water!" The president was quickly rushed off deck. The Iowa barely managed to turn in time, avoiding what would have been the worst friendly fire disaster in history. And that was just one of the Porter's mishaps. Before that, it had already damaged another ship while leaving harbor, accidentally dropped a depth charge near Allied vessels, and once fired a 5-inch shell into the base commander's front yard. No one was seriously hurt, but morale sunk. You might think things would calm down after the torpedo incident. They didn't. The Willie D would go on to endure more bizarre accidents, flooding itself, losing power during battle, and even being struck by a kamikaze. That exploded, but failed to sink it. The ship's reputation got so bad that when it pulled into port, sailors from other ships would shout, "Don't shoot, we're Republicans!" Eventually, in 1945, the William D. Porter met its end in the Pacific, not from enemy fire, but from one final bizarre twist involving another exploding kamikaze and a slow, quiet sinking. No one died, almost as if the ship just gave up. And with that, the Navy's most accident-prone vessel slipped beneath the waves, taking its legendary bad luck with it. Now, speaking of accidents, what happens when a tree-cutting mission nearly starts a war with North Korea? Operation Paul Bunyan, the axe murder incident. It started with a tree. In 1976, inside the Korean Demilitarized Zone, a place already crackling with tension, U.S. and South Korean troops tried to trim a poplar tree that was blocking the view between two guard posts. Harmless enough, right? But then, without warning, North Korean soldiers attacked. 2 American officers were beaten to death with axes in broad daylight. What followed wasn't just retaliation. It was a show of force unlike anything the world had seen in peacetime. The U.S. and South Korea launched Operation Paul Bunyan, named after the American folk lumberjack, but there was nothing lighthearted about it. On August 21st, 3 days after the killings, a convoy of vehicles rolled back into the DMZ, carrying a team of engineers armed with chainsaws and backed by a massive force. And when we say massive, we mean overwhelming. Dozens of helicopters hovered overhead. The 4 Phantom jets circled in the sky. B-52 bombers flew low, flanked by fighter escorts. Hundreds of troops stood ready, locked and loaded. Even a naval task force was repositioned nearby. All this to cut down one tree. North Korean troops stood by, silent and stunned. Not a single word, not a single move. In under 45 minutes, the tree was leveled to a stump. The message was clear. This wasn't about lumber, it was about dominance, deterrence, and a warning. And here's the twist. Despite the overwhelming show of force, not a single shot was fired. The operation ended without bloodshed, but it shook the Korean peninsula to its core. Days later, North Korea issued something rare, a formal statement of regret. But if you thought that was intense, wait until you hear about a soldier who took on an entire battlefield with nothing but grit, bullets, and a will that refused to die. Roy Benavides, the soldier who wouldn't die. In the chaos of the Vietnam War, a call crackled over the radio. A team of Green Berets was trapped, wounded, surrounded by enemy forces and running out of time. Most considered the situation hopeless, but one man didn't. Roy Benavides grabbed a rifle and jumped onto a rescue helicopter. He had no orders, no plan, and barely any gear. What he did have was a sense of duty that overpowered fear, and a decision that would turn him into legend. The moment the helicopter landed, Benavides sprinted through enemy fire to reach the wounded. He dragged men to safety, returned for more, and even called in airstrikes while bleeding from multiple gunshot wounds. A grenade exploded near him. He kept moving. A bayonet tore through his body. He fought the attacker off with his bare hands. By the time reinforcements arrived, Roy had been shot, stabbed, beaten, and blown up. He had 37 separate wounds. When medics loaded him into a body bag, they thought he was dead. But just before they zipped it shut, he spit in the doctor's face. He wasn't finished. Roy Benavides survived, and when asked years later how he managed to keep fighting, his answer was simple. There was only one way out, alive. It took over a decade for his actions to be fully recognized, but in 1981 he stood before President Ronald Reagan, who awarded him the Medal of Honor. Reagan reportedly turned to the crowd and said, "If the story of his heroism were a movie script, you wouldn't believe it." And yet, it all happened. These stories aren't just unbelievable. They're proof that reality can be stranger, braver, and more heroic than fiction. If you enjoyed this video, you'll love this next one.